Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Thank you for joining me today for a conversation that sits beautifully within a series of conversations that I will be exploring here on the podcast and within our Fetch membership, all on rethinking nourishment. We'll be exploring nourishment from a number of different contexts and vantage points, and it's my hope that this assists you to better understand and support your pup. Today, we are asking, what if the key to supporting your dog's health and happiness wasn't just physical, but energetic? In this episode of Mystic Dog Mama, I'm joined by Dr. Neal Loh, a traditional Chinese veterinary medicine practitioner with a deep understanding of how the five elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, shape who our dogs are on every level. These elemental constitutions go far beyond breed or behavior. They speak to the essence of your pup's personality, their emotional patterns, physical tendencies, and the specific ways they seek balance. Dr. Neal walks us through each of the five elements and shares how identifying your dog's constitution can radically shift how you nourish, train, and connect with them. It's ancient wisdom made beautifully accessible for modern, soul-led dog mamas. In this soulful and enlightening conversation, we explore what the five TCVM elements are and how they relate to your dog's body, mind, and spirit, the unique traits of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water dogs, how to identify your dog's dominant constitution, why understanding your dog's elemental type can support more personalized care, how to bring your dog into balance through food, lifestyle, and energetic support, and real-life examples from Dr. Neal's practice that illustrate each type. This episode is an invitation to see your dog not just as a companion, but as an energetic being with deep wisdom of their own. All right, on that note, let's go. Hi, Dr. Neal. Thank you so much for joining me again today on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. I am so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alexa, for having me today again. I'm looking forward to have our deeper conversation about the five element theory and their respective constitutions.
Oh, I'm really excited. Hands down, you're my favorite person to talk to about all things
Thank you.
TCVM. Definitely, definitely. And I think if this is the first time that somebody's hearing about TCM,
Yeah.
TCVM, could we maybe give a sort of general short overview of what TCM is, where that comes from, and how it is a philosophy of life and health?
Yeah, so the way I explain it to my pet parents or pet guardians is that when I when I see a patient and we do our conventional physical exam, I can do that in 5, 10 minutes and we're done. And perhaps I can give you an answer what's wrong with your pet or maybe not. But then when we switch over the lens and look at them from a TCVM's perspective, it's a completely different headspace. It's really hard for me as a vet that is very medically trained and very conventionally trained to shift that mindset. So sometimes I can understand why in our modern world, we kind of struggle to see it in a different light. But essentially, I tell people that when I see your dog, I kind of disregard the breed or your cat, for instance, and I see them as an individual. So I'm looking for what's the dog's personality like? How are they sociable? Do they like people? Are they noise sensitive? Can they sleep well? What's the digestion like? Are they picky? And that really gives me some ideas of potentially what root elements could be balanced or not quite balanced, resulting in what we see conventionally as supposedly a disease. So when basically the way, in other words, when we see a disease, it's the end game of a severe imbalance that's been happening for a long time. So nothing happens overnight, right? We know that. So, any gut issues or kidney problems or bladder problems, it just doesn't just happen overnight. So something must have been brewing and brewing, whether it's inappropriate diets, whether it's too much of chemicals, toxins, and eventually that kind of builds up. So, when I look at basically coming back to the TCM point of view, we are looking at, a dog, a person, a cat, a horse, as one individual entity. So we kind of, yeah, we're disregarding what we know in the Western world or the Western medicine, and really sort of diving deeper into the constitution. So the other word for constitution would be personalities. Hopefully that will be easier to understand. And again, one of the most beautiful things that I've learned in sort of TCM is the five element theory that we are going to discuss more about today. And, you know, I might just give a head start at this
Please go
stage.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, so the five element theory is really, it's a really interesting concept that took me years to totally understand. Well, I'm still learning as we go, and every patient that I see helps me understand and have a much deeper understanding of what it actually meant for me and how I address imbalances as a physician. So in the five element theory, and if you Google, the five element theory, you will see five colored circles of all the five elements. And typically you have fire on top, and then you have earth, you have metal, you have water, and then you have wood. So the five element theory describes the intricate relationship between it essentially describes a lot of things. It describes how the seasons change, how the world works, uh, you know, why we eat seasonally, why different fruits and plants grow in different seasons. So it all happens for a reason. But importantly, I think in the vet context is that with the five element theory, each of the element represents a constitution, a personality type. And amongst that personality or that constitution is connected or associated with a main organ system. So we'll come a bit deeper into that shortly. But the easiest way to get around it is that, for instance, if you've got sorry, Alexa, you can stop me if you want, but I'm just going
No,
to keep
this is
going.
perfect. Please keep
Yeah.
going. Go.
So, for instance, if we've got a fire dog, what does it mean? I've got a wood dog. What does it mean? So let's break it down. So a fire dog is a dog that is super friendly, makes friends with everyone. They don't hold grudges. As a vet, we could give them two injections and they'll turn around and is there more? So they'll be more than happy, but they're always in your face. So that's the thing, right? They don't know personal space. That's fire. And they're always full of energy. They're bouncing around. The energy is 200% and they never stop. So that's fire. Pretty straightforward. Then we've got Earth. Now, Earth dogs are a bit different. Earth dogs are super friendly. They're super sociable. They like everyone as like the fire dogs do. The only difference with Earth dog is that they respect your personal space. So they're happy to hang around. They're happy to give you that space, and they're able to take themselves to bed quite casually and quite easily. So they're very easily trainable because they just don't give you any dramas. So that's Earth, right? And then I will just go through the obvious ones. And you've got the water dogs. So water dogs are typically more timid. They get stressed really easily, and they can be quite fearful. So one common thing that we see could be potentially fear aggression, where they just act out because they're so fearful. So they're not naturally aggressive. They don't naturally like to make a lot of friends. So in the vet context, these are the guys that will come in and we want to give them some space because when you start reading their body language, they might be hiding behind mom or hiding under the chair. That's typical water. And guess what? If someone knocks on the door, where do they go? They run and hide. Or they might sound the alarm and they just buzz off. That's typical water. Classic water. And then you've got the wood, which is the opposite of water, pretty much. The wood dogs are very smart. They are very dominant dogs. They may or may not come across as aggressive. So not all wood dogs are aggressive, but they're incredibly smart. And what I tell people is that when we have a wood dog, it can be very challenging to train them because they already know what you want them to do, right? So say, for instance, positive reinforcement and things like this, treats, they may not be food motivated, but they know what you want them to do. Say like, screw this, just just let just let me go end the session and we can be all happy. Wood dogs like this, and they have very good foresight, which means they are able to predict things very quickly. So these are the dogs that, if you um, say if you had a bad experience at the vet or whatever, and you rocked up at a car park, they're just gonna know instantly before you even drive in. So these are your wood dogs, and they can be quite protective of their territory as well. So we come across as dogs who may protect, say I've come across a few, but I saw one today. She is very snappy to the kids, but she's super protective with mom because I can't get near this dog without risking my fingers. And that's a typical wood dog. So they want the space. They don't want to be carried without their permission, but they're incredibly smart. They're just the lead of the pack. And then finally, you've got the metal. Metal dogs, we don't see them very common. So Metadogs are more kind of in between the different elements. So they are very nonchalant, they're very indifferent, they don't really care, they don't really want to make friends. They could make friends, but just depends on their mood. And they are not easily rattled. So they're pretty cruisy dogs. I've seen about maybe 4 or 5 in my career. And really interesting when you see these guys because they will come in to the consult, the clinic, and they looked at you and go, oh, okay, I'll just take myself to sleep because you're boring. And you can do stuff to them. They looked at you, oh, you're touching my leg. Okay, oh, mom's done. All right, let's go. So that's your metal dog. And the metal dogs are very, very easy to hang out, but they're not very stimulating either. They're happy to follow you around, but they're just kind of, yeah, okay, I can swing either way. It's not unlike the earth dog or the fire dogs where they're super sociable. They want to make friends. They want to be out there. They're just raring to go. So so essentially, five elements: fire, earth, metal, water, and wood gives you some ideas of where your dog could be, but also bear in mind that some dogs can harbor 2 or 3 different elements. So you might not be a pure wood dog. You might be a pure, kind of between a wood and a fire, which I've seen some of those guys. Super friendly with people that they know, but then they can be, a bit funny with strangers, and they want to protect. So you can swing between 2 elements. So that's where, if basically, if we understand the philosophy behind the 5 constitutions and know what my dog is what predominant element is my dog, what does my dog belong to, then that could really help us to also understand what organ systems we need to look after, because ultimately I think this is what this whole conversation is about. One is first identify what constitution that your dog belongs to, and once we find out that element, then we can understand within each element, we've got a predominant organ system that is their weakest link, I suppose. So if they go out of balance, that organ system will most likely flare up, which is one of the reasons why certain dogs get inflammatory bowel. Some dogs never get gut issues, and also one of the reasons why some dogs get bladder issues, for instance, cystitis, recurring UTIs. Why? Or some dogs could eat plastic, could eat grass, could eat toys, and they just have a gut of steel. And whereas if a dog ate perhaps even just 10 grams more livers, they're just going to get the diarrhea tomorrow. Why does this happen? So we start questioning why, and we understand, okay, and that explains why we have different sensitivities, and how even humans between 2 individuals we're so different. And that's because we can explain it or look through the lens of the 5 elements, to help us have this broader perspective of life in general.
Oh, I love that. That's so helpful. And I think that's
Mm.
a fantastic overview. And one of the questions I get a lot from pet parents is how do I actually understand? So you've described the personalities. I think you've done a beautiful job of that. But if your dog is kind of vacillating between two. What are
Yeah.
maybe some key things that would distinguish? So if you're like, for example, if this is helpful for listeners, I was really confused about Lucky's fear, what was fear aggression.
Hmm.
And so he would sometimes, in certain circumstances, certain contexts, he might actually appear like a wood dog.
Yeah.
But when I started to track the pattern, so like when you said he will alarm bark, but then he retreats,
Yes.
and he does do the hiding. So those things that you mentioned, 100% he's a water element, as well as the fact that, and I know you're going to dive into the organs that are associated,
Yeah.
he had kidney issues young. So that's
Mm.
often an indicator too of a dog that might be associated with water if they've got
Sure.
because the kidney and is the organ of the water element. But are there some key things if someone's struggling with, well, he's fire in certain circumstances, but actually maybe he's wood in other ones. How do I know what the dominant one is?
Yeah, I suppose, like as you described, whether, say, for instance, if we've got some sort of fear aggression type behaviors, how do we distinguish them? Well, the key thing is that with wood dogs, they are confident. They're generally more confident individual. They're happy to explore and lead the pack, and they will stand their ground if confronted. That's the key difference between wood and water. The water dogs will make themselves look and sound louder, but physically they are not going to go into a fight. Okay, wood dogs will stand their ground regardless of how big the enemy is. And that's, I guess that's the key difference. Whereas it's much harder for the fire and the earth constitution because most dogs who are super friendly and sociable could be between either, right? It could be, oh, it's my dog fire, it's my dog earth. I'm not sure. It could be both. It doesn't matter, I guess, because um, I guess, from a health perspective, it's not so much important, what's your predominant element. Just kind of know, because they're quite opposite. Like if you're a water dog, you're never a fire dog. Water balances out fire. You're never gonna be a fire. If you're gonna be woody, um, you're never gonna be metal or earth because the wood dogs likes to make decisions and no one can tell them otherwise. Whereas the earth and fire are more flexible, they are more followers. They're like, okay, I'll just follow you. And perhaps it might be more easier to think of it in the human terms where, I mean, I'd like to give this as an example, so it might be easier to remember for the listeners. The wood people are typically the CEOs of companies. They have high drive, they have good foresight, but they are not team players. They would suck in a team because they just don't want to listen to other people's views. And perhaps they also don't have a lot of empathy. That's how I feel about woody individuals. And then you've got the earth and metal. So the earth are your people who work in human resource. So they are the HR people. They're the team players. They meet people, they recruit people, and because they're so approachable, and so they are earth. But cons earth constitution individuals, because of the amount of empathy they hold, they struggle to climb up the ladder to be the top guy because they feel bad for for things and people. And that's, I guess that's how the world works, which is why if we have a team of workers in an office or in a project and we haven't got the elements balanced out correctly, that team will fall apart very quickly. So you can't have, say, out of a team of five, you can't have three fire constitution in there. That meeting or whatever project we're going to work on is never going to take off because they're just full of joy. The ideas are just bouncing across each other, and no one actually sat down and put this, to set this in stone. So we need kind of a fair balance, and which is one of the one of the beautiful thing about the five elements is that it just explains everything in life. It's like, for instance, if you have a dog, uh, or kids, for instance, in your family, say, okay, let's say kids, listeners who've got kids and you've got multiple kids who are brought up in the same household, why are all the siblings so completely different from each other? despite having the same parents. Why? It's a way that the world balances out the energy in the house. That's how I put it. So you will have one that follow the rules, listen to the parents, and then you have one that rebels a little bit, and then you have one that just do not follow the rules. And that is how balance works. That is how energy balance works in the world. The same with dogs too. Like if we have a super calm, I mean, this is not all the case, but majority of the cases that I see, if you have a nice earth dog and you think, it's nice to have an earth dog, let's get another one. I can almost guarantee you, your second one may not be an earth dog because you'll be up for a surprise, which I see so commonly. Completely different. You can have two dogs from the same litter, and one will be smart, easygoing, chill. The other one will be a lunatic. And we see this all the time. Yeah.
I love it. And I also see, I wonder if you've seen this as well, that people
Hmm.
tend to bring in the element that in the dog that
Yeah.
they need, that there's this correlation too between like our constitution and the dog's constitution. And there's such an
Yes.
opportunity for learning. I wonder, have you seen those sorts of correlations?
There is. They either balance each other out, or if they don't, then I think this is when we see chronic disease happening.
Mm.
So a lot of times because dogs are essentially mirrors of human emotions. So this is where I see a lot of times where dogs reflect what the main owner is the main owner's constitution or whatever they're going through. I just see it so often out there, and I think the main reason is because the constitutions or the energies is not matched. Yeah,
Hmm.
sometimes they offset each other, which is great, but this is where you have harmony. So this is where we have balance, and when you have balance, you have no disease. But when you have a complete imbalance, then we're up for a ride, basically.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Now you mentioned that each system, each constitution is attached to an
Correct.
organ system. Can you give an overview of how that works?
Sure. So let's recap the five elements again for listeners who are brand new to this. So we've got fire, we've got earth, metal, water, and wood. So within each of these elements, we have a main organ system that's going to be associated with it. I'm just going to be simplify it so that we don't get into the much more complex stuff. So the fire element, which is quite easy, is your heart. The earth element is your entire digestion. Your metal would be your lung and your general immune system and your skin. Anything that's superficial, it's your kind of your metal element. And then water is very straightforward. It'll be your kidney and your bladder. So anything to do with water excretion, it just kind of makes sense for me. And then the wood element might be a bit harder for us to remember. It's the liver and the gallbladder. And also one of the probably the most common imbalance that we will see in the modern world because of the stress and the chaos that we as humans experience through this world, we pass on a lot of this energy to our dogs. And that's why we see a lot of imbalance in these regions. I guess for the context of the five elements, I'm going to focus on dogs because
Mhm.
cats, we don't see them as much. It's much harder to identify your cat's constitution. I mean, you can, but cats are a bit more mysterious creatures, I suppose. They like to keep things to themselves and not tell you what to do. Anyway, so as I was saying, the wood element imbalance is very, very common because within the wood harbors the liver. And liver is such a big organ in the TCM's perspective because it holds such a much broader meaning. The liver is a detox organ, we know that, and it aids in your in the digestion, especially your upper gut digestion. But importantly, it's also an organ that helps us to detox physically and emotionally. Okay, and amongst that five element, you will see, that five circles or the five elements. The outer circle is what we call the nourishing cycle, where each element will nourish each other. So this is where if you have an imbalance in certain elements, it could not nourish the next element. So if you let a symptom or imbalance, just go on and go on, then this is where, especially in people, we live long enough to see this. This is where we will see, perhaps. So let's say the earth and the metal element. The earth will nourish the metal, right? And what's in the earth element is your digestion. And what's in your metal element is your lung, your immune system. And guess what? If you don't look after your digestion, what's going to happen to your immune system? So that element doesn't get nourished. So that circle doesn't complete. And that's why you get poor immune system and it just keeps going on to cause other issues in life. So kind of trace back to the core root imbalance is really important when we try to fix really challenging, multidisciplinary, multifactorial sort of issues that we see in our dogs. And commonly we see, combination of skin allergies, behavioral challenges, and digestive disorders. Very, very common, the triple combo.
Mm-hmm.
And you can easily explain through the five elements. So we've got a nourishing cycle where each element supports each other, but we also got the what we call the controlling cycle. So there's only two cycles. Either you nourish each other or you control each other. The controlling cycle is more like a star, the way I draw it. So each element controls your opposite element in that circle. So it's not the next one adjacent to it, but it's the opposite one. And what that does is that it holds the circle in this indefinite tension. So nothing falls out of place. Okay. So that this is the controlling cycle. And what we commonly see is liver disharmonies, right? I was saying the wood element controls your earth element. It keeps everything nice in nice harmony and in check. So when basically what happens is when the liver is overwhelmed, whether it's from emotional stress, whether it's from diets that are too processed, lots of chemicals, lots of drugs that we've taken, antibiotics, the liver gets overwhelmed, and so they over control what we say in TCM. They're over controlling the digestion, and by that token, what we're going to see is that we're going to see liver disorders and a very, very weak or volatile digestion. And in terms of liver disorders, we can see this in various ways because the liver is such a big organ, right? So we could see this as a behavioral, or yeah, we could see this as a behavioral disorder. So dogs who are just really pissed off at each other, or they have anger issues, or they have sleep troubles, or they have allergies that reflect the liver meridian. So your ears, your groin region, and your paws. So these are your classic. I'm sure many listeners out there, if you've got a dog with allergies, I can guarantee you your dog's going to hit one of these regions. Rashes in the groin, licking the flanks, or chewing their paws because they're so stressed, or they have recurring ear infections. So that is essentially when you tick any of these boxes, we already have a liver disharmony. You know, it's already flagging it right there. And then if I were to ask the next question, how's the digestion? If I have a dog that is picky, that chooses what they want to eat, that has random diarrhea, or worst case scenario, we have diarrhea with mucus and blood. Now that's dampness. We are looking at a sinking ship basically. So we don't necessarily have a disease name. We may or may not have one. So we can say, no, your dog's got pancreatitis, your dog's got skin allergies, your dog's got a behavioral problem. So we could see a behavioral specialist. We could see an internal medicine for your digestive disorders. We could see a dermatologist for your skin troubles. But essentially, if we have all these challenges, and we look through the lens of TCM, hey, we just got a liver and gut and digestive disharmony right there. So what we really want to do is that, regardless of what which you try to do with the conventional methods, we have to understand that the medications that we have now in the society for itching, for inflammatory bowel, they're not going to be long lasting because as we say, it's allopathic, right? So we might have an injection to help with the itching. We may have steroids, corticosteroids for the inflammatory bowel. But these are going to be likely to be lifelong medications. And the thing is, if your dog also have say, an aggression problem or behavioral challenges, how are these going to fix that? They're not going to fix that. Or if your dog has recurring ear infections, how are we going to fix that? You're not going to fix that unless we try to sort out the liver disharmony, the liver imbalances, and then we can strengthen the gut at the same time. So this is kind of bringing them back to balance. So essentially, if I were to treat dogs like this from a TCM perspective, we are looking for root causes, and there are not many elements we can start poking our fingers into because there's only five elements, right? It's not that difficult. So let's, a dog comes in with certain elements. Okay, which element does it fit in? And then we can ask questions on digestion. Okay, is the earth element affected? What's the constitution? That's really, really important. Like a dog walks in with skin allergies. I want to know, am I dealing with a wood dog? Am I dealing with an earth dog? Because these are the two most common constitutions that we see. So if I were to see, basically, if I see a dog with skin allergies and kind of a funny gut, but never really sick, just some vomiting, some diarrhea, but well in itself otherwise, and the dog's a wood dog, then you just take 4 to 5 boxes of a wood element disorder. So the focus straight away, majority of my focus will go onto the wood elements. Go, okay, you've got massive liver issues right there. We've got massive liver stagnation. Can we resolve that so that the earth element can breathe? But if we have a earth constitution with the same skin allergies and the ear infections, I'm gonna focus more on the gut in that instance because a lot of these guys you find that they have trouble tolerating a raw diet. They have trouble eating different proteins, for instance, and they just get loose stools easily, or they may present with multiple lipomas, so just fatty deposits because the earth element is basically your entire digestion. So if you have a imbalance in your constitution, then the focus must be on that as I guess my number one priority, and then second will be whatever that is connected to the disease or the symptoms that we are seeing. But what's really interesting too is that if you also look at the five elements, they have a sensory organ that is connected to them. So I'll just put this in a broader term so that we can understand a bit easier. So for instance, the liver, the wood element opens up to your eye. So woody dogs that have imbalance in that element, guess what? If they have allergies, they are most likely to have conjunctivitis, like really red eyes with a lot of discharge, quite common. And we might say it's allergies or seasonal changes, but not always the case. And then if we look at the if we look at earth element, the earth element is connected to the muscles. So earth dogs typically can have weak muscles or like a sore back. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting when you think about all this because when we fully understand the five elements and the color that is associated with the sensory organ, what sort of where it comes out from, like liver comes out to the eye, and if we have conjunctivitis with recurrent ear infections, with chewing paw, with rashes in the inguinal or groin region. From a TCM perspective, predominant. We're looking for predominant signs to tick the boxes off. Yeah. So let's say if I've got 6 or 7 boxes and I tick 5 boxes of wood element problems, you're gonna go straight into the wood element straight away because you can ignore the minority there. It could be something that's connected to the fire element. Maybe the dog's depressed. Maybe the dog's has got too much joy or too much joy. Doesn't matter because you already tick 5 boxes of wood element disorder. So that's how I think Chinese medicine works. We're picking pieces of puzzle and putting them together and see if we can see that picture. And it doesn't have to be 100% either. So we can have a 100-piece puzzle, and all I need is 75 pieces of the puzzle. And I can see this picture right there quite clearly. Okay, I know what I need to do. And the remaining 25%, we can wait. We can see what unfolds, almost like like an onion when we start peeling the layers. And that's how we work. I think from a TCM perspective, you peel the first layer and you uncover the second, and it might be the third. There may or may not be the fourth, but uh, this is the beauty of it. That's which is what I really enjoy the most when I see a patient and kind of makes me stare and have that five element popped out in my head and go quite quickly. Yeah.
Oh, that's so helpful. And I think I agree with you. I love TCM and I love how it gives it's a window for me into other ways of thinking and being. And often, like you were saying, from as a nutrition consultant, I'll often have dogs that are presenting in exactly the same way that you're describing. And they're also seeing a vet behaviorist, for example, because
Hmm.
there's reactivity, there's other
Yeah.
things going on, but nobody's joining those pieces together until they come to me. And it's like, well, hold on a second. This sounds like it could be related to this, and you start to pull those
Yeah.
pieces together, and that's actually where I've found you get the results because you're looking at the dog as an individual, but you're pulling all of those pieces together to paint a better picture of what's actually going on with the dog rather than just trying to get rid of symptoms, whether that be from a physical ailment or that even be
Hmm.
from a behavioral perspective. I don't like that behavior, so I want to get rid of it. We still sort of approach the dogs in that same way. But I wanted to ask you really quickly off of the back of that. So when you are, uh, for example, you're saying that we're seeing a lot of liver problems
Yes.
with within the kind of modern world. Is that all, but is that indicative of not only what we're seeing going on in the world, but also does that somehow tell us that are there more liver dogs, for example? Will your dog present issues from the modern world through their dominant constitution? Or are you seeing those issues primarily because the liver is having to detox everything?
I think we're not necessarily seeing more liver dog per se, but we're definitely seeing more individuals that have like individuals with liver that is overwhelmed with what's happening in the modern world.
Right.
I guess as we were saying earlier, the liver is has got such a broader meaning to it. It's a detox organ. It helps us to sleep peacefully, right? But also in the vet world, because vets in general, we're not taught nutrition and therefore we don't push a fresh food diet. And having a highly processed diet from a young age puts a lot of pressure on a body that is trying their best to grow, and we're just hitting them with lots of synthetic, processed food. So that's not really helpful either. And of course, with that, then we're adding pressure with routine, flea, tick, worming control, and heartworm. So, almost like disregarding the geographic factors of where you live. So almost like we don't consider all that, and we just say, oh, every dog needs, a heartworm injection. Every dog needs this every year, or etc. Without really identifying or understanding the environment that this dog's going to grow up in. And just for instance, if I've had dogs where they live in just 99% indoors, in a retirement village. They just come out to the front yard and just go back, and they live with a retired couple. Now, that dog is not going to need, a full anti-parasite regime as opposed to a dog that potentially has a higher risk and traffic going to showgrounds or doing agility. The risk ratio it's so far apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that on its own adds tremendous pressure to the liver, which is why we get a lot of liver disharmonies here. And also people will needs to realize that dogs ultimately will reflect how you feel, right? So in the world that we live in, we're highly stressed, we're meeting deadlines, everyone wants things to be instant. So that adds a lot of pressure unknowingly. And if we humans, if you're unable to sleep properly, and guess what your dog's gonna do? Your dog's gonna go, hang on, what's happening? Why is your breathing so erratic? Why aren't you sleeping through the night? I'm just gonna wake up as well. And then, interestingly, if you look at the five elements, I just had a thought in my head that each organ system has a um, has a 2 hour window where most chi will, I guess, congregate in that channel the most and reset, balance, nourish that element at that time. Um, why does it apply to dogs? Because we domesticate them. So this will not apply to wild animals. Uh, it will not apply to animals that do not follow our normal human circadian clock. So whilst we domesticate dogs, they go to bed when we go to bed. They wake up when we wake up. So we can apply this principle to them. But what's really interesting is that for the vast majority of dogs who have severe liver disharmonies or wood element disorders, the liver time is 1 to 3 a.m. Is your dog waking up between that time? Yes, licking their paws, classic. um, and then the 2 hours before the liver is your gallbladder time. Again, gallbladder, liver, they're both in the wood element, husband and wife, I call it. So any dog that wakes up around midnight, can't sleep, pacing around, have a drink of water, go to the toilet, you're ticking a big, big box of a liver disharmony right there, regardless of what other symptoms you're showing. If I have a dog that's not sleeping through, waking up to scratch, licking their paws in God forbidden hours of the night, I'm gonna fix that liver of you. I'm gonna try to fix that liver, right? Yeah, and I'm gonna try to fix your humans too, because I think they are reflecting a lot of heat of the human counterparts. Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Mm.
Could we quickly run through what the other organs are for the
Yeah.
different elements? So we've got liver is for wood and presents the
Yes.
sensory organ is the eye. So if you
Correct.
might see eye issues. Okay.
Yes.
And then can we go
Um.
around?
Yeah. We've got water, which is the kidney element, and the sensory organ is the sense of hearing, right? So, I'll just spend about 2 minutes on this water element quickly because we will see this in geriatric and older dogs, where the essentially the water element is the kidneys is what houses our essence, and our essence decides or determines our longevity. And things that deplete your essence are typically, as I said, inappropriate diets or chronic stress, fear. Well, fear is the emotion that's associated with water anyway. So excessive fear will deplete the essence, and anything that's got to do with arthritis, the aging process, that's all water. So having the sense of hearing that's connected to the water element means that if you've got a dog that has lost your sense of hearing, what that tells us is that we've got some deficiencies happening perhaps at a much earlier age than we anticipated. And therefore, there will be a need to nourish and look after that kidney, that water element, because as I say, losing a sense of hearing, what it's doing is that the essence are depleting. So they are trying to conserve energy to protect the main vital organs. And hearing is kind of least important. It's quite far away from the kidneys. We just kind of lose that first. And or we might develop sort of early arthritis. But I think besides the sensory organ, what's more important perhaps will be emotions, because we might see this more common in our, I guess, between Alexia, between your what the patient that is seeing. So wood element, as I kept saying, it's anger. That's the emotion that's connected to the wood element. So any imbalances within the wood element will show up as anger. Water element will be fear. So fear is the first thing that shows up. You're timid, you're fearful. The earth element is worry. Earth elements worry. So earth dogs, typical people pleasers, they worry a lot. So yes. So that's one thing that I always tell people, earth dogs are very empathetic. They will feed off your emotions a lot. Fire will be joy. So lots of joy. But when the element gets off imbalance, you become depressed. So these are the typical dogs with separation anxiety, right? So very, very joyful, always playful, and then until you shut the door and they go crazy because yeah, because that's just the nature of how things work. Metal dog would be grief. That's would be the emotion that's connected to metal. And I've seen a handful of this. So if you've got a dog that's metal, they typically don't handle grief and loss of loved ones very well. They hold on to it. And what's very interesting is that within the metal element, we have got your lung and your large intestine channels or meridians. So we can have imbalances either in the lung side of things or the large intestine side of things. So you could either get so with the lung, we think of the immune system basically. So your immune system will be suppressed, and that might make you susceptible to, anything, a UTI, a some sort of canine cough. Then your large intestine would present as constipation normally.
Mm.
Yeah, so I had probably two patients that had chronic constipation, and we tried treating it. One was a cat actually, and we tried treating with conventionally with laxatives and even with herbs. The cat never responded, which I find highly strange.
Mhm.
And then I probed a bit deeper, and I realized that the cat was adopted shortly after she had given birth, and the kittens were taken away within the same week. And so she was holding on to grief. Yeah, and so what was interesting, and I learned a lot from that cat, was that I focused a lot on acupuncture instead, and I treated the grief side of things to allow her to let go of things. Which is kind of interesting because if you think about it, grief, large intestine, constipation, the reason why you're constipated is because you don't want to let go. You need to let go
Yeah.
of the toxins and the waste, and that's how we can navigate around issues like this. So sometimes things are a bit more complex than what it seems on the superficial surface, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
Mm,
No, that's really helpful. And I think it gives an insight for people to sort of look at their dog's life as a whole. What other things are they showing? How are they doing emotionally? That might key
100%.
you in to some
Mm,
other things. I wanted to ask you as we're kind of wrapping this up as well.
yeah,
How do we then start to address supporting our dog's constitution and their overall health through food therapy? Because I think that's the brilliant thing about TCM that pet parents can do on their own,
correct.
is address the diet. How would
Yes.
you start to think about applying food therapy in a constitution context? And the reason I'm asking this too is that in the West, we were talking
Mm,
before we started recording that there's more of a mainstream acceptance of TCM, and it's getting
yeah.
there's an element of it being a fad. And so we're seeing foods pop up for a particular constitution, for example. And so
Mm.
how do we think about actually using that? How would we approach that with our own dogs?
So I think first of all, if we are able to identify the predominant constitution that your dog belongs to, then it'll be a lot easier. But also, hmm, so we've got five elements, but probably the easiest way to remember or think about this is that if we've got more of an earthy dog that seems to worry a lot and have a very sensitive stomach, then because there's a lot of things, there's a lot going on in the vet world, whether we are all for raw feeding, or we have a lot of arguments about a cooked diet that is perhaps not the best, but there are just dogs that cannot tolerate too much raw food.
Hmm.
And it is just a fact. Like some people can't tolerate too much cold juices or raw salads because they could be in earth constitution, and they need more warming foods, more gently cooked diets to support that constitution. So if you got something that's more, I guess, more excess, more fiery, like firewood, then typically these guys can afford to go on a raw diet if they are young and they have no health issues. Otherwise, I would put these guys on a raw diet. When it comes to the water dog, that one's a bit 50-50 for me because I find that they could flip either way. the water and meadow can go either way. I've got plenty of meadow dogs that does just well on raw diets, and I've got dogs, meadow dogs who does equally well on a cooked diet. I don't really care what they eat because I think the meadow dogs can flip either way, and there are multiple ways to balance a diet over time. So I guess there's no need to stress about the nitty-gritty specific details of, okay, I need to feed my dog spinach or I need to feed my dog broccoli because of the constitution. So I guess the one or two specific food items are not going to be as crucial as what your overall diet is going to look like over time. So I guess, like I say, you've got a kidney, a water element dog. So there are certain foods that will enter the kidney element, directly. But this is all coming to really specific food therapy, which is, probably probably harder to summarize because every food has a different kind of, every food has their own energetic properties and also they could enter different channels of the body. But essentially, if you've got a water dog, like water dogs, because they're so timid and they tend to be much more fearful, I like to feed a combination of both raw and gently cooked if I can. But that also really depends on the lifestyle and, what I guess mom and dad can afford. So there is no right or wrong in my opinion. But as we were saying before, wood element disorder super common. The color of the wood, they like green stuff. So anything that's green, your vegetables, anything that's sour, your vinegar, apple cider vinegar, your fermented cabbages, these are all going to benefit your liver. Whereas for your earth side of things, would be things that are going to be nourishing the gut. So like pumpkin, squash, sweet potato, bone broth. This will be highly beneficial for the earth, but may not be entirely helpful for your super woody and just dominant wood dog because these guys can just handle anything in their way. Yeah.
No, that's
But I
really
guess when it
helpful.
comes to yeah, it comes to designing a food plan, a food therapy plan. Um, every vet does it differently. I certainly do it a bit more casually, and not because I don't respect the food on its own, but rather my focus is on the compliance and the longevity of this plan. Is it going to work out? Is it going to be too complex? Is it going to be too expensive? It needs to be doable. So I always ask myself if I were to design a food plan, it can't be it can't be complex to a point where by if I looked at it and go, no, I don't think I'm not sure if I can do this, then I'm not gonna uh, I'm not gonna recommend it. So my food plans are usually very simple and importantly flexible, and it has to be adaptable because things can change. Because you can have a fairly woody dog and with the herbs, with the diet, a year later, the dog could become more manageable, may not be as woody anymore. So then you don't have to keep pumping the dog full of like, food that's going to support the element because the element's now more or less balanced. But finally, I think importantly, let's not forget that we cannot change the constitution of your dog. So I've been asked this question many times. Um, my dog's an asshole. Can we change that that personality of his? I said, look, the truth is we can help him understand and manage those emotions better, but we're never going to change that. He or she is whatever that constitution is going to be. Fire dogs will always be fire dogs. They will always be in your face. They'll always be there for you. And then unfortunately, your water dogs are always going to be water. They're always going to be timid. So it's really hard to build confidence, which is where I guess training and things like this, when they come into place, we have to give them a lot of patience, a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Mhm.
I think but there's that invitation too of when we have grace for our dogs, that we can have
Yeah.
grace for ourselves as well, because they are mirroring, right? And we
100%. Yeah.
we don't change either. We have a core kind of constitution and we can work with that, but accepting who we are. But also it's been really interesting. I mentioned to you that I've been spending time with Stacy Renfrey, my colleague in our
Yes.
our fetch program, and also she's of Hozo Hounds, and her dog Ted is classic fire.
Fire?
Classic fire, yeah. And my dog Lucky is classic water. And seeing the two of them together and how they actually balance out, and to your point about the confidence thing, one of the big things I've struggled with Lucky is his fear of everything, fear of the world.
Mm,
And that was exacerbated by the fact that he was a pandemic pup. So he was 12
yes.
weeks old when we went into lockdown during the pandemic. And so that didn't help that he wasn't exposed to a lot of things. And it's
Mm,
been a lot of training, but also supporting his kidneys. So I've
yes.
used food therapy specifically, like even in terms of when I'm choosing a second secreting organ in his diet, I will generally lean towards adding kidney in because like feeds like, or feeding dark foods like black sesame seeds, that kind of a thing. But it's been interesting from a behavioral perspective while I've been here to see how Ted actually helps support Lucky in building his confidence when we're going out into different situations, and seeing Lucky come out of his shell in that way has been really exciting. Oops, I think we've lost you. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Hmm.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sorry, what? I'm not sure what
No
happened.
problem.
I dropped out.
No, no problem.
Shit. What were you saying before?
No worries. No, I was just saying that it's been
Right.
interesting to see how, in terms of the confidence thing, with Lucky being around Ted, who is a
Mm,
fire
yes.
dog and,
Yes.
fine with the world, that's actually helped support Lucky coming out of his shell. So even
Mm,
pairing the dogs, like if you find a kind of friend dog that can help
yes.
support your fearful dog, that's another way of going about it because their elements balance. But it's been amazing to watch. Ted is a hot, he's very, very
Fire.
warm
Yeah.
fire
Yeah.
dog. Lucky is a very cool water dog. And you'll find Lucky if you're looking for where the dogs are in the house. Lucky is sunbathing right in the sunbeam. Ted is as far away from that as possible. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's amazing to watch it play out in action. And then when
That's
you see that, you can support them.
mm, that's like your classic yin and yang.
Totally. Totally. And
Yeah.
they balance one another, and seeing what, like,
Mm,
Ted is very, very vocal, very, very excited to go out for the walk in the morning. And when I try to
mm,
get Lucky out, he's like, no, I'm hiding under a chair. I'm not interested
yeah.
in doing this right now. And it's teaching us to look at them differently, and to work with them and
Mhm.
support the individual dog, which I think ultimately that's what TCM is really great at doing.
It is. Even just I mean out of the vet context, but even in relationships, we see that happen as well. You find that couples who last long together, they are often very opposite of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what I find fascinating too, because I said from the start that the TCM concepts can be applied not just to the vet world, not just to our animals, but on ourselves, and basically how the world works and why energy balance is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
love
once we
that.
understood, look, for the listeners out there, once you really understand, even 20% of the five element theory, that's enough. That's enough for us to have a starting point and for us to really appreciate why our dogs may behave in a certain way, and or certain boundaries we may have to respect because they are a certain constitution, and there's no point pushing them in different ways, and also explains why certain training methods may not work in all dogs, because you can't just put them in a boot camp and expect all them to be compliant. The wood dog isn't going to comply to you because they already know you're playing them, and then you're just gonna scare the crap out of your water dog if you put them in a boot camp. So yeah, it has been a really roller coaster for me when I stepped into this journey and really understanding the constitution and that is paramount in terms of going forward in helping pet owners really appreciate their own dog. And once they can see it from, I find that once they can understand, oh, my dog's a water dog, that's why he needs more space, that's why he needs time to build confidence, we can't rush him. Once we understand that, everything just makes sense. Everything just falls into place. Like, why does my dog don't listen to me? Why is he so stupid? Because maybe because he's just full of beans. He's just easily distracted. That's why he can't listen to your training. And so once we understand that, we go, oh, okay, he got a fire dog there. He needs lots of fun, lots of play. So we may have to approach training in a different way. And we've got, oh, why do I find it hard to train my dog? Because he's a wood dog. He doesn't need training. He just knows it already.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
Oh, that's perfect. Dr. Neal, thank you so, so much for this conversation today. I think it's been so enlightening. And I also want to point listeners to your book because I think it's a beautiful book. And if people are interested in TCM and how to support their dogs, where can they find that?
Yes. So my book, Healing with Real Food, you can purchase them mainly through Amazon. For listeners in Australia, you can buy them through my store on my website, which if you Google my name, Dr. Neal Loh, Holistic Pet Vet, you will find it. And it has a really nice short chapter that explains the five elementary uh, and the constitution. So if you're still confused and you want a nice quick summary, that will be a really good starting point. And then we can sort of, I'm sure everyone has their own unique journeys to go from there. But yeah, it'll be a very simple read, I promise.
Is perfect. Thank you. And if people, you offer telehealth consults as well, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if somebody wants to actually book an appointment with you, how can they go about working with you?
Um, on my website, I've got online appointment scheduler, so it's very straightforward. We just go on there and we choose a time and then we just book it in. For overseas patient and clients who may have maybe in a different time zone, normally you get in touch with me directly and then we can set up a time to do a Zoom meeting or a phone consult, whichever that suits you better.
Perfect. And I'll leave the links on how to access you for all of that in the show notes. So if you want to work with Dr. Neal, check the show notes and click on the links from there.
Yeah,
Dr.
cool.
Neal,
Thank you.
thank you so, so much. Like I said, you are my favorite person to talk to about all things TCM. I'm so grateful for your time and your energy and your wisdom today. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me for my conversation with Dr. Neal Loh. Which of the five constitutions is your dog? I would love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama or just leave me a note in the comments. To connect with Dr. Neal, go to his website holotreats.com.au or connect with him on Instagram at neal.holisticpetvet. I've left these links in the show notes. Do you want to explore a little bit more about all this? Then join our free Facebook group, Fetch First Light, to connect with other holistic dog mamas diving into energetics, fresh food, natural healing, and soul led care. I've left the link for this group in the show notes. And if you're not sure whether or not you've got a warm fire dog or a cool water dog, grab your free copy of our Fetch Guide to your dog's unique energetic paw print. Just type energetics in the comments or DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama for the link. All right, until next time.